Now, one thing I often hear said about Andor, and have said it myself actually, is that you could take the Star Wars out of it and it would still be an excellent show, which admittedly is maybe kind of a strange or odd thing to say when you really stop and think about it, or could even be interpreted as a sort of backhanded compliment, and I have seen or heard some try and make the argument that this is indeed a bad thing or bad quality of the show. And we'll get more into that in a moment, because really I think most of the time when someone says that, or when I say you could take the Star Wars out of it and it would still be good, what I'm actually trying to say is, even if you take any and all the cool Star Wars stuff out of it, or if it doesn't have a ton of it in the first place, or if you take out any of its famous iconography or characters, which Andor does have quite a bit of, or if you take out anything else that you could argue makes something look or feel like Star Wars or that the franchise is generally famous for, like lightsabers, it is still a damn good show. Basically, it's trying to say, or tell non-Star Wars fans, I suppose, or trying to reassure them, I'm not just saying this is good because it has lightsaber fights and space battles and that sort of thing, and as a Star Wars fan, sure, I tend to enjoy those sorts of things. I'm saying it's simply a good, well-written show all on its own. It doesn't heavily rely on Star Wars to be good in the first place. At least not in the way that something like, say, The Force Awakens tried to do it, where it very much, for better or worse, went out of its way to feel like classic Star Wars and to use classic iconography and classic characters as much as possible, or almost as much as possible. It did forget one. But it tried to tap into nostalgia as much as possible and to use things that were very familiar to the more average viewer or casual fan, even if it maybe didn't make a ton of sense to use them, because 30 years had gone by in story. Certainly you could have or should have seen hints of what had come before in the new designs, as you could see some connections between the prequels and the original trilogy visually. But to just basically literally use TIE fighters and X-Wings and Star Destroyers and to make another bigger Death Star, it just kind of felt lazy and didn't feel like we had any kind of progression since last time we'd visited the galaxy. And I think George Lucas was dead on when he said or complained that there was nothing new in that movie. But anyway, with Andor, it being Star Wars isn't exactly the main reason I'm watching it, or I think it's really, really good. It can stand all on its own as a great story. And I mean, don't get me wrong here, it's also some really frickin' good Star Wars. I do absolutely think this is Star Wars and appreciate those aspects or elements of it as well. I like the themes it uses that very much fit in with what I always say is the core of Star Wars, or what I feel like it is. That being the choices made by individuals and what comes of them for good or ill. All I'm really saying, all anyone I think is really saying when they go with the saying, you could take the Star Wars out of Andor and it's still really good, is, again, it's not relying so heavily on that it would completely fall apart without it. Star Wars isn't just propping it up and making it good all on its own. And along with that, then, you don't need to be some kind of lore expert to truly get or enjoy Andor. This could literally be the first thing Star Wars you have ever seen, and you're not going to be lost. Which I also think is important because you shouldn't punish people for not knowing what came before or not having seen everything else before. You do want people to discover Star Wars and feel like they can fairly easily get into it. Though yes, it is still nice to reward those who do or have seen all of it or know it very, very well. And I think Andor does a really good job of walking that fine line. I mean, me and plenty of others watching, we know the greater context, right? We know this whole story, how the Empire came about because of the prequels, and knowing how it ends because of the original trilogy, and knowing what comes immediately after Andor because of Rogue One. We know all of that, and it does, in some respects, it makes this show even better because I can step back and see and appreciate its place in a bigger story. Yet at the same time, it doesn't punish you if you haven't seen any of that. In fact, if this is the first thing Star Wars you have ever seen, you got one hell of a treat ahead of you to see how this will all eventually fit in with everything else. And to eventually see some bigger connections, which certainly aren't needed in the moment when watching Andor, but again, can be very much appreciated when you can see that bigger picture. But even if you don't, you are still caught up and moved by the moment because you don't know how it's all going to play out. But anyway, staying on target here, there are some fans out there who don't like Andor, which is absolutely fine. That's fine by me if you don't enjoy it as much as I do or don't like it at all. But there are some out there who try to sort of interpret this saying as a very negative thing, which is rather curious because does that mean something Star Wars should be bad if you take the Star Wars out of it? Though, in all fairness, I don't think that's what they're trying to say. Instead, I think they're saying there needs to be something special in a Star Wars show or movie that, if removed, makes it not feel like Star Wars anymore. That there is some sort of secret ingredient that goes into everything Star Wars, and without it, you don't really have Star Wars. Which then sort of relates back to a topic or question I ask a lot here on this channel. That being, is Star Wars more of a genre in and of itself, more of a style of storytelling or type of story? Or is it simply more of a setting or backdrop that stories of all kinds or any kinds can take place in front of? Or maybe it's a bit of both, which is where I tend to fall these days. I do think there is something or things that, yes, do tend to make something feel more like Star Wars, or some stories that are maybe just more befitting of it, and some that might just feel way, way out of place if told in it. But at the same time, there is room for more types of stories for Star Wars to explore, I think. And as I was already saying, I do absolutely believe Andor fits into Star Wars extremely well, like a hand in a glove even. It is that good of Star Wars, in my opinion. I think it tells a story that is very befitting the name and goes right along with the themes we often see in Star Wars. I think this definitely feels a lot more like Star Wars than certain other projects we've gotten lately, even though visually those other ones maybe looked a little more like Star Wars than this one does. Or maybe I should say had things like Jedi and Sith and lightsabers in it that this franchise is most famous for. And yes, one example of that I feel is The Acolyte. What is that show if we take the Star Wars out of it? Could it stand on its own? And even though I think the answer to that is no, and that it didn't work well with or without Star Wars, but as I always say, you don't have to agree with me. You can be a huge fan of The Acolyte if you want. That's absolutely fine. But if you are one, I have to ask you, how do you think that show would have fared, or would you have liked it and enjoyed it if the Star Wars was taken out of it? Which, admittedly, that's not an easy thing to do in that case because even though with Andor you can, I would say fairly easily, swap out and change the factions and make the ships and places we see different, to change names and the traits of characters and so on, and everything still kind of works about the same, it's harder to take out lightsabers and lightsaber fights and to insert generic laser swords or something similar and to have it all kind of be the same thing. It's also not easy to do something similar to Jedi and Sith without it feeling like Jedi and Sith from Star Wars. But assuming it was done, assuming it was all swapped out and didn't have the look and feel of Star Wars anymore, would The Acolyte have been a good show all on its own? If it were generic science fiction / fantasy, is The Acolyte good? And to that, I would say no. I don't think I make it past the first episode or two of The Acolyte if I don't have this kind of obligation to watch it, because I report on Star Wars, the good and the bad. I report on all of it. But no, either way, I don't think it was very good, even though, like I was saying, I don't think the Star Wars part of it propped it up or made it better or saves it in any way. Actually, I think it might actually make it worse in some respects, because if this had just been a generic sci-fi fantasy type show, I'm not sure some of the anti-Star Wars themes that are kind of in there would have bothered me at all. And I do also want to quickly point out, even if something does have a lot of Star Wars in it, to the point where you really don't have much left if it was removed, that doesn't automatically make something bad either. You can go heavy on the Star Wars and still end up with something very, very good. Anyway, to be as fair and as objective as possible here, there are things about The Acolyte that weren't bad or that I enjoyed. Some of the lightsaber fights were indeed pretty good, and I thought at first, till he became kind of an idiot, I thought Sol was a solid Jedi, and that Khmer, or the Stranger, he made a fine Sith. They were interesting characters. There were also some other interesting things or aspects that could have been explored in a different way that I think I would have appreciated here. There is some decent Star Wars stuff in it, even though if the majority of the show is not so good. And I think if you take the Star Wars out of it, and I have seen many people who say they really, really like the show, and all they really do is kind of praise the lightsaber duels and say how great they were and don't really mention anything else they enjoyed about it. But if you take that out, are you honestly left with a show that virtually anyone watches or cares about? I mean, come on, let's be real here. If that does not have Star Wars in the name, how many people are going to watch it? How many people are actually going to finish watching it too? Again, you're free to disagree with me, but I just don't think there's anything there underneath it all. Whether you keep the Star Wars or you take it all out, that makes for a great show or even a really decent one. Whereas with Andor, you can take out all that and still have something fantastic. You can take out every drop of Star Wars and you still have a great show. Or, yeah, you can leave it in and have something even better when you put it into that greater context of Star Wars. You have something that can be appreciated by fans and non-fans alike on many different levels. You have something truly special, a truly special story. And yes, I do think there are other shows like The Mandalorian, especially the first season, maybe not so much the second or third, where you could take all the Star Wars out of it and it works pretty much the same or just as well. I mean, Grogu, yes, he is a former Jedi Force user, but he could have just as easily been a cute little thing with special powers, and the show is no worse or better. Hell, most of the characters in the show don't even know what the Force is anyway. And though there is a good degree of Star Wars iconography in there, all of it can be swapped out for something else, and you're no worse off, I think. Though, yeah, the fact that it is Star Wars does, in some ways, it does make it better or more enjoyable to Star Wars fans, which is fine. And so, in closing here, I'm in no way arguing to make Star Wars not feel like Star Wars anymore. I'm not saying the key to it is to always make things where you can just remove the Star Wars entirely or almost entirely and it works pretty much the same. I'm not arguing to make everything Andor. Again, I think you can sometimes lean very, very heavily into Star Wars and you can still make something incredible. But even in those instances, there has to be something underneath it all that's holding it up. That it's not just relying on Star Wars. That there is something there besides, this is some cool Star Wars stuff to make it work. I mean, I love lightsaber fights as much as the next fan, and I never have a problem with seeing them in Star Wars, that's for sure. But I want great stories that can hold up with or without them. For me, the flash and style, they're great, I love it. They're a part of Star Wars, but it is the substance underneath it, it's the quality of the story that is the true key to making good Star Wars. You should, to a degree, be able to remove any and all Star Wars and still have a story there worth telling or worth watching. Well, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Do you think Andor is good even if you take the Star Wars out? Or is that a bad thing to take the Star Wars out and be good? Or maybe it is somehow a bit of both. Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.